welcome to another Drive-In Double Feature podcast. I'm Ryan,
I'm Nathan.
and this is the podcast where we talk about 2 movies a week every Tuesday and Thursday. But before I get into anything at all, we have a Patreon over at patreon.com/Drive-In Double Feature podcast. You know, Nathan, I was actually over in Japan the other week, and
Sure you were.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I imagined I was, but
Mhm,
or it could have been a fever dream, maybe. I don't know,
mhm.
but.
Maybe.
Eh, But I was talking to one of the local Japanese residents, and I was looking at a Gamera statue, and they're just like I was just like, oh, that's a really nice Gamera statue, and they're like, oh yeah, like we got this for our store, after we heard the Drive-In Double Feature podcast, Gamera versus Jiger episode, and we thought this would
Yeah,
really be
out of
really
all.
nice. We thought this would be really nice for our store after Ryan and Nathan were talking about it. Like, they have a Patreon, it's only $5 a month. You can get all
Mhm.
types of fun content with fun conversations over there. It's a really great deal. And I said, yeah, yeah, it is. They're like, oh yeah, it doesn't affect any regular content either. I said, that's a good deal. And then they said, I really wish Ryan and Nathan knew how much we really loved their content. And I said, I think they know.
We know.
Yeah.
We know, yeah. At this fever
But
dream 7-Eleven with a Gamera statue in it.
just like at a pond, like it's like a regular turtle.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like the last Gamera movie we watched.
Yeah, kind of.
Hmm.
But anyway, this one is Gamera, the Guardian of the Universe. That one's from 1995. It is directed by uh Shusuke Kaneko. This one is a revival of the Gamera series. And one thing you may have noticed, there's a Toho logo at the beginning of
I
this
did
movie.
I did notice that, yes. So things have changed.
Yeah, I mean they do have the little Dai logo, but it's still a Toho production because Dai, while they were able to claw their way out of bankruptcy from the
Mhm.
70s, they still don't have a lot of money. So
Yeah.
they were able to get some help from Toho because like back during the original Gamera series, there was a boom of kaiju movies from the 80s and the 90s from like all these Godzilla movies, and because of that they wanted to do another giant monster movie, and they weren't originally going to do another Gamera movie. They're originally going to do another Daimonjin movie, which is that giant stone statue that comes to life, and it's like in feudal Japan.
Okay, I
And
think we might have talked about that a little.
we did for like a little bit because that was like an original Dai movie, but
Mhm.
they determined that was going to be too much money, so they went ahead with Gamera. And actually, at one point, the original Gamera director Yuasa was attached to direct this one as well,
Really? Wow.
and it just did not end up happening because it ended up sitting a long time with production. So they actually originally got Kaneko, the director, to direct this movie, Gamera, and he was kind of disappointed because he was a huge kaiju fan and he really wanted to direct a Godzilla movie, which he did eventually end up doing
Okay,
at
cool.
one in the future, which I believe was Godzilla, Mothra, and Ghidorah, all monster attack.
That's a cool one to get to
And
direct.
yeah, so he does eventually get to direct one, but to kind of prove himself because he was kind of like this young up and coming director where he did to have some successes before, but this was like what he wanted to do this whole time. And there was a lot of studio, by the way, all my info is being sourced from the commentary by Matthew Frank from the
Mhm.
DVD. Um, so there was a lot of contention between the studio and the director where the director wanted to make a lot more like a grittier, realistic giant monster movie, and the studio was like, no, it's like we need another kid-friendly Gamera movie. Like go back to making
Yeah,
Gamera like a big goofball.
which is so funny. We've talked about this before, how like it's the polar opposite of Godzilla. Like what
Yeah.
like it's funny.
And they sort of had to find like this little middle ground between
Hmm.
them where it's like, okay, well, because the monster design the director wanted was actually going to be a really weird design, a lot meaner looking, a lot slimmer Gamera, but
Hmm.
they're like, well, no, you got to give him like his iconic turtle look. So they had to like kind of meet in the middle where he looks like a turtle, but he's like a little
Yeah.
spikier, kind of meaner looking.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like where they ended up into where they were trying to determine like what type of movie to make. And the thing that they did determine is that when they were trying to think of like the monster, they determined that Gyaos is Gamera's definitive villain.
Really? Okay. Cool. I'm okay
Because
with that.
if you include all the stock footage that was used in all the other Gamera movies, Gauss has been in the most Gamera movies, technically, if you include stock footage.
Okay, yeah, I guess.
So he's got that over you.
Not Jiger. Okay.
No, not Jiger. Sorry.
Mhm.
But they were kind of wanting to make a lot more of a realistic movie, at least on the director side. And the biggest influence the director had was Ishiro Honda, excuse me. And Oshirio Hondo.
Yeah, you're one of those people.
I'm one of those people, yeah.
Mhm.
But it was kind of determined that he wanted to make a movie really closely related to that.
Mhm.
And if you follow the plot of this movie and certain scenes of this movie, there are a lot of similarities between this and a Godzilla movie.
Mhm.
I mean, because how the movie like kind of starts with like the conflict is there's a giant boat. The boat ends up getting attacked. This reporter and scientist go to this mysterious island where they say like these monsters attacked it,
Mhm.
and they can kind of see like remnants of it. Those are all in the original Godzilla movie.
It's true.
So it's very reminiscent of like they were trying to make a Gamera Godzilla movie. And I think that's this one it more closely relates to like a more adult version or more serious version of Gamera than all the
Oh yeah.
previous ones.
Oh yeah, for sure. It doesn't have that focus on like I mean, a kid is its friend, but it's not so like heavily being like, oh, Gamera's friend is the friend to all children and our protector. It's not really doing that. I have not watched any modern Godzilla like from this era from like the 80s, 90s.
Right.
But from what I've seen clips of, this reminded me a lot of it. Like when I watch this, it's like, oh, this reminds me of like what I've seen of those movies. Just at least in look.
Yeah, it's very closely related to this one. They had a lot bigger budget, obviously, than they did
Hmm.
from like the 60s and the 70s, which is very apparent. It still wasn't as big as a Godzilla budgeted movie, which you can kind of see that from like the Gauss monster, to be honest, a little bit. It's not
His
totally up
eyes.
to par. Yeah, it's not totally up to par, but they were a lot more strategic with how they shot these monsters, and they weren't like on full display of them like being awkward movements or
Oh
anything
yeah.
like that.
They do a good job of hiding it, and there's a lot more special effect green screen shots here too.
Yeah, and CGI is apparent in this one too.
Hmm.
So, how the movie begins, like I said, is there's a teenage girl, um, and that girl is how do you pronounce her name? Ayako Fujitani,
Okay.
the teenage girl who ends up forming a spiritual bond with Gamera. Do you know who she is, Nathan?
You know, she looked familiar, but no, I don't know who she is.
She is Steven Seagal's daughter.
No way.
I,
You're
yeah.
kidding. No, stop joking. Really?
Yes.
Oh my God, that is so funny. Because like I remember, I don't know where I've seen her before, but I
She's
looked
been
her up
she
and I was like,
yeah,
she's familiar.
she was in like The Patriot and
Wow.
like she's been in like movies before, not like huge successful movies or anything like that, but she had like a little career going.
Interesting. And she's Steven Seagal's daughter. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
So
I mean, that's also not a
she,
good sign.
no, I mean he's not a good person,
Yes.
but still, it's just a fun fact. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, she ends up forming a bond with Gamera because there's some like supernatural elements where she ends up getting emotionally attached to Gamera and
Mhm.
all the stuff that happens to Gamera, it's affecting her too. But there's another like there's a main scientist woman and then the military experts that end up going to this uninhabited island and they're basically saying, oh yeah, like people are just disappearing by these giant birds.
Yeah, this
And
movie kind of has two plots in a way, right? But that
yeah,
one I would say is the main, kind of the main plot.
yeah, that is like the two plots of this movie is that was kind of like the thing like they were originally were kind of hoping for, or like the original script idea was that this movie was going to be kind of really closely related story-wise to King Kong versus Godzilla, where it's like they had two monsters, um, and they all had like their own separate story and plot, and then by the end they would be kind of like interwoven together. Like
Hmm.
the girl would be connected to Gamera, and then like the scientist team would be connected to the Gyaos monster type of thing.
And I like that. I actually think that keeps that keeps it interesting because you have two different things to look at. And you know the whole time you're like, "Oh, I know these are going to connect. I know what's going on here." But it's fun to build
Yeah.
up to.
Yeah, so that's kind of what they were trying to do. That they said they weren't able to get that goal 100% of what they wanted, but that's what they were kind of shooting for in this
Mhm.
aspect. And like I said, they get to the island and they do eventually run into the Gauss monsters, but unlike the first movie, which was just one Gauss monster, there's three Gauss monsters all attacking at this little island.
Yeah, and I think they learned that they're eating people because she's like digging through its poop, right? Kind of like
Yeah,
Jurassic Park, and finds
yeah,
a human remains in it.
yep. They find like Gauss crap and they just
Mhm.
stick their hands into it and they pull out human remains.
Yes, yeah. So these Gyaos monsters, they're mean, but they don't get called that for a long time into this movie. They're kind of just known as giant birds because they
Yeah,
don't
they
know
just
what they
get
are.
called they're like birds quotes is like
Yeah.
what they always say.
Hmm.
Um, and they get to the once they get to the island, they are able to lure the Gauss monsters back into like this really famous Japanese baseball stadium,
It's
and
huge.
they originally like get them to like kind of lure there. They're eating food, but then like one Gauss monster flies away, and all of a sudden that's when Gamera shows up because they know about Gamera, but Gamera's like kind of like a legend at the time.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that's a mystery in this movie because like at the beginning of the movie, there's a ship with plutonium that like crashes, and it's the back of it's the back of Gamera, but they kind of like there's just this like this moving island. I forget what they call it, atoll, a moving atoll or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they're even walking on it. They find a monument and those little like just like little like beads on it, and that's how the girl becomes connected to Gamera. So like that's where they converge. Is Gamera comes out of the water to take on Gyaos.
yeah. So that's kind of like the whole momentum plot mover was with Gamera is coming off the island, coming onto Japan to kill Gauss,
Hmm.
and he does kill one of the Gauss monsters when he first arrives. And when he does get there, the other Gauss monsters are able to break out of their cells and fly away.
Yeah, and like
Uh,
clean cuts. Can I love the shot of it, it's like genius. Of the stadium being like halfway open because it's one of those domes where they closes, and Gamera is just like has his little hands and he's just looking inside the stadium.
yeah,
Love that.
yeah. That they show that, and that they show the Gauss monsters flying away, but they've kind of like the military determines that. the Gyaos monsters are not the real threat. It's Gamera because he's a big scary monster. And they're
Hmm.
just kind of like he was destroying part of the city. He needs to go.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like the main plot of the movie is that while there are these two threats, they're way too focused on Gamera
Yeah, and
instead of
then yeah,
Gyaos.
and they learn way, way late. I mean, like towards like the very end of this movie, do they learn like, oh, Gamera is protecting us. He's trying to stop these monsters.
Yeah,
Gamera has a
because like
lot. I don't even know what you say. He's very strong-willed to handle something like that and
he's
not
very
kill
for
humans.
he's very forgiving.
There we go. Yeah, like if somebody poisoned him, poisoned his food, he would forgive them,
Yeah.
like in Phantom Thread.
And just like Phantom Thread.
Yes, yeah.
And that's kind of like what they were going for though, like because I mean this movie is a complete reboot. So they wanted to show that Gamera still is a protector to Earth, but they had to basically relearn that Gamera was a protector.
Yes, yeah. Um, so it kind of serves as almost like it's what they would call nowadays a soft reboot to everything. They have to learn the lessons that we already learned in those 60s, 70s movies.
Yeah, so they had to go back and do that, and Gamera at one point does become incapacitated due to Gauss and the military attacking him at the same time. But while he's unconscious, like I said, that girl who also has a bond with him, she ends up falling unconscious too because she's connected to Gamera.
Uh-huh, yeah. Also, Gamera gets cut and like this girl, she bleeds like profusely. It's like kind of
Yeah.
like insane.
Yeah, that's how bad it is. Like when
Hmm.
Gauss does it, like the little laser beam that cuts
Hmm.
Gamera, she just like and just
Hmm. Yeah,
and
it's I have to say that all the stuff with Gamera and Gyaos, it looks good. It looks surprisingly good. I think the costumes are good. Gamera, they did Gamera good here, and then I think all the miniature work is really solid here, especially with all the explosions and everything. Because there's a lot of fights. There's a ton, like it's really nice. There's a ton of fights in the city, full of destruction, which is what I like. So it was those fights were working for me.
the thing I want to give the biggest props about this movie is that it's never filmed in a boring way.
No, no.
Like even like going, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of the stuff I do like from the Showa era Gamera movies, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of filler in those movies, and it's a lot of scenes where it's like scientists at a table talking or
Hmm.
like that. And there are, I think there's at least one scene of those, but it's kind of showing that they're at least having like a meaningful conversation out of it. They're not just like talking about the monster and just like, oh, these are its whereabouts or oh, this is its weakness or anything. It's just trying to determine like, is Gamera like really worth going after? And they kind of determined that yeah, Gamera's the one we should be focusing on, but and then the scientists are basically saying like no, like I think Gauss is like the real threat, and they're just
Yeah.
like we're not let the men do the talking here type of
Yeah.
thing.
And that conversation's what, like 2 minutes? And like the other ones, that would be much longer and probably wouldn't push the plot forward. It would just be like, here's a description of him and where he came from. And I mean, I love those movies. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they got a little rough there at the end, but they have a charm to them. But this one is genuinely like just entertaining from start to finish.
Yeah, and they don't none of the characters feel like one-dimensional character. Like there was a time like, even in Godzilla where it was just like you could literally put like anything like a house plant or whatever and like it'd be just as effective, or just something like
Oh yeah, this one has a houseplant reporter again. Yep, as usual.
yeah, well it's just like they didn't have a personality and it's just like I don't
Hmm.
even know what their names are. I don't know who like they
Yeah,
at
I
least
mean,
make these people stand out.
oh yeah, no, they're all pretty memorable by the end of the movie. Like like usually at the end of these, you would remember the kid. That's usually who'd have the most character. But here, even the adults, they have actual like dimension at least.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and all the scenes are really just filmed in a really dynamic way. You get like a full scope of all these of the special effects too. So I mean, the only thing that looks kind of dated is, like I said, like the puppet work for the Gamera for the Gyaos puppets,
Yeah, because they have like
and
googly eyes. I don't know who did that. It's a little silly.
yeah, I don't know about that. And then the other reason was the CGI. It looks very dated, but that's
Yeah.
not the fault of the movie.
Yeah, yeah, I can't fault the movie for bad CG. You know, it is what it is. It's part of the watching movies from the 90s.
Yeah. And I just I really like the way like they did a lot of the action sequences. Like Gauss turns into Super Gauss towards the
Hmm.
end of the movie, and Gamera does get beaten up a lot in this one too.
Hmm. He has to run
And
away
then
multiple times.
yeah, it's just he's very clearly outmatched by all these situations, but he keeps coming back for more each time, and
Hmm.
he is able to eventually defeat the Super Gauss. And everyone's just very thankful, obviously, because they're like, "Oh, Gamera, thank you." And they're like, "Well, what if something like this comes again?" They're like, "Don't worry, Gamera's going to come back." And
And
again,
he does.
they don't know that for a fact, but
Like they had a
they're just,
conversation with Gamera, like, you're coming back, right?
yeah, like, "You're going to come back and help us, right?" And he's just like nodding. But
I love that. He like they thank him and he bows his head at the end of the movie. Love it. I don't know. Gamera has even if he looks meaner, he's still got the charm he always has.
Gamera has always been very expressive, and he always just has like a hint of personality.
He does. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I wish I tried looking it up. There's no Gamera museum in Japan. We need to start one.
Yeah, well, there should be one, honestly.
There really should be.
But yeah, so they really weren't expecting this to be super successful, and it really wasn't like a huge success. I believe like they spent like 4 million
Hmm.
on it, or 4 million, and then they end up grossing like 6 million.
Gotcha.
So very underwhelming success, but it was enough to spawn some sequels coming up.
Of course.
Um, and I really just enjoyed this. Like it just felt like such a breath of fresh air
Yeah,
to
no,
the series.
I agree. It felt like the reboot that it kind of needed. It needed the time to get away out of its like original era where it's like it was cheesy, cheap kind of movies into something that's like actually like it was nice to see a Gamera movie that kind of took itself a little more seriously and did something like this, but still was entertaining. Like it was just a fun movie. It was just nice to sit down and just have a fun time with Gamera.
It was fun.
It
It's
was
fun.
fun. Yes. As I always say.
So yeah, I definitely would say, I mean, that's like I said, since this is a reboot too, you don't really need to see any other of the Gamera movies.
Mm-mm.
So, in my opinion, I mean, this would be a movie you can definitely go out of your way to see.
And honestly, like if you're not into like older movies or older monster movies, if you wanted to start here, I really think not a bad place to go to.
No, and like I said, there's no like confusing plot. All you got to know is this Gamera's a giant turtle. That's the only thing you got to know.
That's true. Yeah. Otherwise, you're good.
Yeah. So we both give this one a recommend.
Oh well,
We
don't put words into my mouth. Okay, I'm just kidding.
oh, okay.
Could you
So go
imagine
ahead.
if after all that I was like, no, that movie sucked.
That
Don't
movie
see
kind of
it.
sucked.
Yeah.
But yeah, we both like this one, and we're gonna continue watching these newer Gamera movies, which I'm excited to see and how they play out.
Hmm. I agree.
But that's gonna do it for now. So, Nathan, what are we gonna be talking about next time?
All right, Ryan, to kind of pair with my retro pick, and thank you for if you listen to those older episodes. I hope you see some kind of progression from those, even though I was re-listening to them and I think they're actually really good episodes. But I was like, why not? Let's do another Brian De Palma film to kind of go with it. So I'm gonna pick Phantom of the Paradise, which is streaming right now on Prime. But Ryan, what are we covering on Thursday?
Well, Nathan, we're gonna be talking about a sequel to one of our more older episodes, which I believe that was on our retro week,
Hmm.
where it was Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So we are going to be doing the sequel to that movie, Return of the Killer Tomatoes, which is streaming for free on YouTube right now. So go
Awesome.
check those out. But thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. If you have any thoughts and opinions, please email us over at driveanddoubleFeaturePodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow our Patreon over at patreon.com/driveanddoubleFeaturePodcast. But until next time.
Until next time.